Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 266. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm joined by author Helen Hynson Vettori to talk about her new Black Swan thriller series. The first two books, Black Swan Impact and Black Swan Shock, are out now, with a third on the way. Before becoming a novelist, Helen spent her career as a government planner for catastrophic events like pandemics. When she retired in 2018, she imagined a quiet life of travel and crafting. Then 2020 arrived. As the world shut down, Helen was stunned to see the government ignore the very plans she helped create. To cope with the anxiety of that moment, she began journaling, which quickly transformed into storytelling. The result was Black Swan Impact, set during a pandemic in the year 2113, followed by Black Swan Shock, centered on the aftermath of a massive earthquake. Drawing on her real-world expertise, Helen writes stories rooted in disaster, but driven by energy, resilience, and hope. In this episode, I'll chat with Helen about her writing journey, the meaning behind the series title, Black Swan, and why planning for catastrophe actually helped her sleep at night, as well as a few other things. Coming up. Helen Hynson Vettori, thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
It's my pleasure to be here. I'm very excited to talk with you, fellow author, and hear things that you have to say that we can say together. It should be a nice get-together.
Good. Well, let's start with your new series. So it's the Black Swan thriller series, and there are two books out. What I'd like to do is have you sort of set the scene for us, kind of set up the series, and we'll talk about each book in turn after that. But I'm particularly curious, what is the series about and what inspired you to write it?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing I need to do is to define what a black swan is, because many people would assume, and why not, that it's the animal that flies and you find in Australia. Yes, there are those birds there, but a black swan used to describe an event is something that is catastrophic and so devastating that no one could have foreseen or imagined it. So think of 9/11. That day was absolutely terrifying and something that we never could have imagined, and yet it did. Well, once something like that happens, you have to pull up your bootstraps and move forward. So the first book that I wrote is called Black Swan Impact. And to be honest, I never thought I was going to write this, much less the other two books in the series. I never thought once I was in the first book that I would have a series. The reason that it came into being was actually pretty organic. It goes back to the fact that I was a government employee who planned and prepared for biological threats to include pandemics. President George W. Bush tasked the federal government to plan and prepare for a pandemic in 2005. And I was one of the people across all agencies and departments who would get together and create the plans. Well, When I retired in 2018, I walked out the doors feeling that I was gratified that I could serve, but now it was my turn to go out and just have fun. I thought I would paint. I thought I would travel. I thought all kinds of things, but I didn't expect a pandemic to cause a lockdown in 2020. Did any of us expect a lockdown to occur in 2020? So I thought, okay, we need to do this because we don't know what this virus is. We don't know how it will affect us. We need time to breathe, to really evaluate what's going on. All for it. But as time moved on, I was, I'll say, shocked at first, then befuddled, and then angered. And I would rant and rave to my family as we all Zoomed together, just like everybody else. And one day, my sister said, "Why do you continue to have this reaction?" I said, "I can't unknow what I know. I know what plans were in place. I know what we did. And I'm disappointed with the messaging." And I would go on and on. And she said, "Okay, let me say something. There is a story right there." I hadn't thought of it that way. So I thought, oh, well, writing is cathartic. I'm going to sit down and journal. And before I knew it, boom, I was writing a novel and sending a few chapters at a time to my siblings. And my brother would say to me, "How can you forecast things days, weeks, even months in advance?" Even though my story begins in the year 2113 to separate the audience so that there's not the trauma of COVID right then and there, um, I knew what plans and assumptions we had talked about all those years. I knew what we thought people would do and how they would react. And I exercised a bit of imagination thinking of the what ifs. So it wasn't that difficult. And it just poured out of me. The book wrote itself. And that's what I love. That's why I say it was organic, because not only had I not really intended to write a sci-fi political drama thriller, but it just took a life of its own. And I came to love it and the characters so much that when I put the pen down, so to speak, I thought these characters have much more to say. And I dove right into the second book called Black Swan Shock. And the Black Swan in that novel, the year is now 2141, is a massive earthquake along the New Madrid Fault. Have you ever heard of the New Madrid Fault?
I have.
Well, good for you. Many people have not. So let me just say that it roughly is parallel with the Mississippi River. And the earthquake that happened in 1811, 1812 was the epicenter of New Madrid. And so that's why it's called the New Madrid Fault. And that earthquake was huge. I don't know what the magnitude was. I don't know if they were capable of deciding what the magnitude was. I believe somebody thought it might be it might have been 8.2, 8.4, somewhere in that range. But it was so substantial that bells in belfries in Boston rang because the earth was undulating even that far away. So I did a lot of research, reading a lot of firsthand accounts, and I thought, okay, I'm going to weave some of these firsthand accounts into the situations my characters might find, and also use my background as a paramedic, having been a paramedic before I joined the federal government workforce, and create a story that is intense and thrilling, because quite frankly, I am someone who loves thrillers. I love to read them. I can't get enough of them. Movies too. I just love everything exciting and fast paced. And although that may seem that the books are plot driven, I think I also gave the characters such personality that you can identify or adore them, including a dog who is named Gelato, and she's one of my favorite characters. But the most outstanding character in the second book is Marla, who I wasn't sure how she was going to be as I first introduced her. But I was out on a walk, as we all did during those lockdown days, and I waved at a neighbor who was outside too, and she waved back and just had so much vitality and effervescence. And I thought, that is Marla, because the neighbor, her name is Millie, is the light of the neighborhood, and she has Down syndrome. So Marla in the second book is a character who's outstanding, including the fact that she has Down syndrome, and examples how people with disabilities or special needs can and will be good for societies and beneficial in many ways.
Excellent. Okay, so a lot of ground to cover. I want to talk a little bit about the world building you did, because both of these books are set in the future. The first one about 100 years out, 90 years out, give or take. And then the next one about not quite 30 years after that. So when you were doing your world building, this seems to be near enough that people will recognize the world. About 100 years out, in some respects, seems far enough away that a lot of things could happen, a lot of things could be different, and yet close enough that the world won't be unrecognizable, or chances are it won't be that unrecognizable. I'm curious, why choose those dates? I know you wanted COVID to be in the rearview mirror for sure, but can you give us a sense of why those dates, and then what you did to create the world, what you decided needed to be changed, what you kept the same, how you decided on the details, the nuances of it?
I'd be happy to. So, first of all, people are people. Whether it was a time when before we had written history, or whether it was during the Middle Ages or present day, people are people. And so that is the thing that can weave into any situation, any environment, any age, and still allow us to relate. And so I hope that that is successful. There are good people, there are bad people, there are bad people that want to be good, that end up being good. There are good people that end up being bad, and everything in between. So that's what makes humans humans, is the complexity of relationships. And we can look at those no matter what time frame we're talking about. Now, as you said, yes, I did want to go into the future to allow there to be a barrier so that we can absorb the horror and not necessarily translate into our horror of the present day. And as for 2113, it wasn't intentional that I chose 2113. The way I came about that is I predict there will be a World War III. And I wanted the story to be post World War III. So in my mind, I decided when I think World War III will erupt, and then allowed for a time frame for it to play out, and then a recovery period, so that we're not starting in this bleak environment that is already something of a horror in itself. People were thriving. Science was offering so many good things to the people to advance humanity. It's a very positive time. And unfortunately, a virus emerges and challenges literally the entire human race. And it's maybe similar to what the people felt like when the Black Plague struck, because that that we know of in recorded history was the worst situation with a pandemic that we are aware of. Now, pandemics are cyclical. We know that, but some are not as dangerous as others, or devastating, I should say, I guess. For instance, in 2009, the H1N1 pandemic, sure, it was a pandemic, and I'm not making light of it, but it was not as impactful as COVID. So there you have the reasons why I chose what I did. And so 2113 was just a happen chance of when I thought the people around the world would be in a much better place.
Well, let's talk about two things: the events in the books, and then I want to talk about the responses, how governments responded, how people in general, societies respond. So let's talk about the events first. In one, we have a pandemic, and another, we have this sort of catastrophic environmental event, an earthquake. I'm sure people are wondering, could these things really happen? Now, we've experienced a pandemic recently, so people are probably thinking, well, okay, yeah. So I'm curious, the events in your book, how close to reality could they be? And was there any point where you're like, oh, I need to ramp this up a bit. I need to fictionalize this aspect of it. Or are these things that legitimately could happen? I mean, they're Black Swan events, as you say, so we can't necessarily, they're so catastrophic, they might not be predictable, but how closely could we come?
It's a good question because, of course, we don't know what's going to happen any minute from any time. And I was an emergency manager in the federal government. I was the senior medical intelligence analyst. So combine those together, I understood what biological threats were out there, as well as all other threats, to include earthquakes or terrorism or hurricane, go on down the list. And I had to plan and prepare. And it was a collaborative thing across all federal government, state, local, tribal territories, all over to collectively decide what's the best way to weather a storm that we are afraid can come. Sometimes they come. Think of the worst hurricane you've lived through. Probably Katrina is the last one that I recall as being the worst for my family. Think about that New Madrid earthquake of 1811, 1812 that literally could ring bells in Boston. And the first-hand accounts that I read were absolutely heart-wrenching. So just because it did happen doesn't mean it can't happen again, or maybe even be worse than. Now, when we plan and prepare, that allows us to be ready, and hopefully we never have to use whatever that is, but hope isn't an action. So I don't think being a quote unquote prepper, as some people call the ones that they think are outlandish in what they prepare for, but pragmatism and a community thoughtfulness is always good. To include, how do you take care of yourself, your loved ones, and your pets in the event of an emergency? And that Black Swan may be just for you and your family. A devastating house fire is horrible to an individual, no question about it. How do they handle that? Then a community, then a state, then a country, the world. It just is something that can happen, likely will happen one way or another. And so just for your own peace of mind, go ahead and look out, but don't become paranoid or scared in a ridiculous fashion that you can't survive or live. No, just be ready. And in the second book, in the back where it's the Readers Club question section, all the books have questions for book clubs, but in the second book, I had the last question, so to speak, be a way to evaluate how prepared you are for an emergency. And then once you've made that evaluation, how to improve where you stand in your safety preparedness and emergency preparedness. So, and they're not actions that are outlandish. You know, do you have batteries on hand? Do you have a plan for making phone calls when the phones are jammed because of everybody trying to call everybody? These are the types of things that people can do and be pragmatic. And by the way, why not enjoy reading something and seeing how others react to a situation? And you can also ponder that. How would I have handled that? Now, did I use imagination? Of course. But as I told you, I also used firsthand accounts and firsthand knowledge as a paramedic before I joined the federal government. I saw a lot. I was interacting in a lot. And so all of those things came together to create the stories.
As you were talking, I kept thinking, particularly in your role planning for these types of events, it sounds like the stuff of nightmares, like all that information that you have to keep in your head and consider and think about and work on day after day after day. How do you deal with that? Is the act of creating plans for those events the antidote, like the sort of mental, emotional antidote for that? But because I would think, how did you sleep? I mean, this stuff would have kept me up at night.
Great question. I think you've hit the nail on the head. While I was in the thick of things, it was, I'll call it a salve. Okay, if this should happen, whatever this is, the X, I know that we can do Y, Z. Things are ready in place. So that was something that was really a comfort. But once I left and had no idea why things were happening the way they were happening, it was stressful. So when I was at work, I'd go to work every day, be happy as a clam, get in bed, hit my head on the pillow, boom, asleep. But once there was COVID, I couldn't sleep. I was in knots. The anxiety was tremendous. It was for, I think, most, if not everybody. But the thing was, like I said before, I couldn't unknow what I knew. And that was perhaps the hardest thing to accept.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the reactions in the books. Compare those to the way we, collective we, have reacted in the past. So, as you said, there are all these plans and protocols for these types of events. It sounds like behaviors in the past have not aligned with those protocols, at least not in all instances. Going forward now to your books, jumping forward in time and landing in your stories. How does the response play out? Does it play out the way you've practiced, the according to the plans that you know about, or in writing it, did you find that people are flawed and mistakes get made and it's really hard to stick to a plan? I'm curious how closely you came to following let's say your own protocols for your stories.
Okay, so Dr. Saya Case is in the first book, the main protagonist, and so she has the knowledge and the ability to bring to bear everything that should be done to at least mitigate the situation. And quickly she finds that I guess I would call it pragmatic approach is something that's a struggle because we end up talking about people. And you have not only politicians who are worried about things other than necessarily the health measures, but maybe some other factors, as well as you have people who can process the the situation in different ways. There are two groups, it ends up, that arise. There are the carpes, and that was a nickname given to those who said carpe diem. We're going to live our lives. Our days are numbered. Let's just go out with a bang. And then you have the ostriches. That was their nickname, of people who wanted to hole up, to do everything they could to sequester themselves to try and survive despite this horrible pandemic. And how each government official had to take care of giving people their rights while still allowing the community as a whole to be able to survive. So it became an interesting perspective of how people might react, and how to react to those reactions. And so that was purely speculative.
You mentioned that you're working on book 3. So this is planned as a trilogy. Is that still the case now that you're working on book 3? Is it still the plan to wrap it up there?
It is. Yes. Book number 3 is in the first draft. I'm editing like crazy. It's called Black Swan Terror. And as you know, the 3 books are Black Swan, blank, Black Swan, and then it was Impact first, then Shock, and then this final one, Terror, to give a little clue as to what the Black Swan event is. And in this case, it's a terrorist attack. So I think this will wind up to allow people to decide a little bit for themselves, but be guided toward how the characters will be able to continue with their lives or not. I mean, it's kind of up in the air with some of them. So I wanted to, for my own satisfaction, I'll say, tie up some loose ends. But then I also wanted the audience to be able to project what they would like to see. And I leave it at that, because I can't forecast what others think. I would like them to be able to tie up or continue the progress, the plot, the lives of whomever they choose.
Now that you've got 2 books down, the third close, have you been bitten by the writing bug? Is this something you think you'll continue to do, or are you going to finish book 3 and leave it?
Well, unless another Black Swan happens and I need to be locked down, I see more being able to go out and travel as I had planned to do. I'm an artist. I love to paint. I'm a craftsman. I make stained glass windows. I want to spend more time in other artistic fields. And still, I will keep my hand in some writing, because I have a Substack blog that once a month has, I'll call it an op-ed, and it's related to biological threats, or how to protect yourself from something that you may not understand or have known about. And it's very short, and just kind of keeping my hand in what my old world used to be.
Good. Well, you mentioned your Substack. So if people are interested in learning more about you, these books, your thoughts on other things, where can they go to find that information?
So I have a website. It's Helen Hynson with a Y, Vettori.com. And there would be links to the blog in my Substack. There are links to various interviews. There are little blurbs of people having reviewed the book. And there's also one snippet of a partial reading. So, you can get a little flavor that way.
Excellent. And if people want to purchase a copy of Black Swan Impact or Black Swan Shock, where can they go to buy them?
It's available worldwide. Let's say you have a favorite indie bookstore, great. But a lot of people like to shop online, so you can go to Amazon or Barnes and Noble or the like. You can go to my website and click on whatever. There, I have a favorite indie bookstore. There's a link there. There's a link to Amazon and Barnes and Noble and to the publisher. So it also, they come in different formats. You can get hard copies, both paper and hardback. You can get audio, or you can get ebook, a Kindle type book. So they're available in many formats.
Excellent. Wonderful. Well, hopefully people will pick up a copy and check it out and think about their own preparedness.
That would be great.
And let's hope no Black Swan events anytime in the near future.
Let's do that. Yes, we deserve to have a nice, quiet, happy time, don't we?
We really do. We are due, I have to say.
And be able to read and discuss books and enjoy life.
Exactly. I second that motion. Helen, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I want to wish you luck with the Black Swan Thriller series. Books 1 and 2 out, Black Swan Impact and Black Swan Shock. Everybody pick up a copy if you're interested. And congratulations on everything you've accomplished so far. Best of luck with the rest of your writing journey.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me. This has been delightful.
The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published, as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author, or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the Bookshop at the End of the Internet.